No one would have guessed that Richard Kuklinski was a nice guy, a family man who took his wife and kids to Disneyworld every year, went to church every Sunday, and was a friendly neighbor who was always ready to grill barbecue for everyone. But hidden behind that facade was the most notorious cold-blooded killer in the world in the 20th century. To his family and neighbors, Kuklinski is a normal man, but to the Mafia world he is a devil with the trick of freezing the victims' bodies to hide the time of the murder. Comments. Richard Kuklinski seems to be a normal man like all other men in America, but to the Mafia world he is a devil known as the cold-blooded killer Iceman. Abusive family, constantly beaten by his alcoholic father and his fanatical mother who beat him with a broom handle and even once nearly killed Kuklinski with a kitchen knife. Influenced by his father's violent personality, Kuklinski grew up to be a rebellious person. In the 8th grade, he dropped out of school. Kuklinski is said to have committed his first murder at the age of 14 when he beat a local thug to death. As an adult, Kuklinski's physique became outstanding, reaching 1.96 m tall and weighing 136 kilograms. Kuklinski had a penchant for killing animals since he was a boy. He killed his neighbors' cats by tying their tails together with rope and throwing them over clotheslines to watch them tear each other apart, or by locking the cats in the basement incinerator until they were consumed by the flames. Kuklinski also occasionally tormented stray dogs in the neighborhood and fantasized about killing his father. Kuklinski had 3 siblings. His older brother Florian died at the age of 8 after being severely beaten by his father. The family later lied to the police that Florian had fallen down the stairs. Kuklinski's father left home shortly after killing his eldest son. Kuklinski's brother Joseph was later convicted of raping a 12-year-old girl, murdering her, and throwing her from the top of a 5-story building. When asked about his brother's crimes, Kuklinski replied, "We were born of the same father." In the 1950s, Kuklinski joined a gang of criminals in New Jersey. At the age of 18, he officially entered the Mafia world with his first contract killing. However, his penchant for killing made Kuklinski feel frustrated at being asked to kill so few people, so he took to regularly hunting victims on the streets of New York, either a predetermined victim or just a random person who annoyed him. Standing 1.90 m tall and weighing more than 136 kilograms, Kuklinski easily satisfied his hobby in killing people. His methods of killing were usually shooting, stabbing, or bludgeoning. Kuklinski's choice of weapon also depended on his mood, using everything from ice cubes to hand grenades. Kuklinski even killed people with a nasal spray bottle filled with cyanide and then hung it up the victim's nose. Kuklinski sometimes killed by injecting poison or placing it in the victim's food, gassing it, or simply pouring it on the victim's skin. He also dumped the bodies in the trunk of his car and then crushed the cars in a junkyard. The cruelty culminated in the killer beating his victims and locking them in damp areas to be eaten by rats. Kuklinski's reputation eventually became known to notorious criminal organizations, most notably the DeCavalcante family, who hired him to kill his first major gang. Kuklinski then worked for Roy Albert DeMeo, head of the Gambino crime syndicate. At first, Kuklinski owed Roy DeMeo money and paid it off by murder, but DeMeo soon saw Kuklinski's talent for murder and took him under his wing. Kuklinski continued to carry out missions for DeMeo and Gambino. He was willing to kill anyone without hesitation, causing even members of the Mafia to call Kuklinski the devil. As a seasoned killer, Richard Kuklinski always knew how to erase his traces to avoid any risk of being caught by the police. After each crime, Kuklinski often cut off the victim's fingers and teeth so that the police could not identify him, sometimes melting the victim's body in an oil drum or running over him with a car. Disposing of the body was also a method he used. His favorite trick was to store the bodies of his victims in industrial freezers for months or years. He did this so that when the police found the bodies, they would not suspect anything because the bodies looked like they had been killed recently. It was because of this method that he was nicknamed the Iceman. In addition, each time Kuklinski killed someone, he used a different and very gruesome method, all to prevent the police investigation. Once, he let rats eat his victim alive in a cave in Pennsylvania, where he had installed a camera to record the entire process of the person's death. After 4 days, he returned to get the documentary and collect the remains to send to the customer. Besides the gangster life, surprisingly, even Richard Kuklinski's family members had no idea about the cold-blooded work he was doing. In 1961, Richard Kuklinski married his wife Barbara. She had no idea that her husband had killed dozens of people. They had 3 children together, and Kuklinski himself described his family as being just like any other family in America. To their suburban New Jersey neighbors, they were a happy, wealthy family. The Kuklinskis even sent their children to expensive private schools. They threw frequent house parties, and Kuklinski was an important member of the church on Sundays. Even as police cars surrounded the house with sirens blaring, Barbara had no idea what her husband had done to get arrested. In a later interview, Barbara admitted her naivete, but she said it was understandable that her husband had acted without any suspicious behavior. In fact, Kuklinski abused Barbara, who claimed that he beat her several times, including breaking her nose. Kuklinski even killed Barbara's dog in front of her as punishment for coming home late. However, she claimed to know nothing about the Mafia boss's criminal life. She even admitted her naivety in not realizing it. Throughout their marriage, Kuklinski continued to kill. He continued to carry out contract killings for Italian Mafia families. Kuklinski would eliminate anyone who owed the Mafia money or embezzled money or insulted them. The killer was said to have a penchant for drinking and gambling. However, Kuklinski was unlike other members of the Mafia. Although he admitted to killing hundreds of people, Kuklinski said he never killed women or children. Most notably, he made a clear distinction between work and family. Kuklinski did not tell members of the criminal organization anything about his personal life, family, or where he lived. He considered the Mafia as his masters and only communicated with them about work. In addition to being a bloodthirsty killer, Richard Kuklinski was also considered a psychopath because he sometimes behaved strangely. For example, after his arrest, he told of a man who prayed and begged him to spare his life when he was about to be killed. Kuklinski then told the victim that he had 30 minutes to pray to see if God would really come and change the situation. However, God never showed up and never changed the situation, Kuklinski said. By the 1980s, after 25 years working as a hitman for the Mafia, Kuklinski made a mistake that led to his being caught by the law. Originally a professional killer, knowing all the tricks to avoid being caught by the police, Kuklinski made a mistake and paid the price. In December 1982, Gary Smith's body was discovered decomposing in a hotel. An autopsy showed that the victim had been poisoned and strangled to death. In September 1983, the police found a decomposing body wrapped in a plastic bag. The victim was identified as Louis Mosquet. Because the body was frozen but had been disposed of before it had completely thawed. After an autopsy, the doctor was able to confirm the time of the crime. Previously, in May 1983, the police also found another body identified as Daniel Dapper. The victim was wrapped in a garbage bag and thrown away on a remote road. From what they had collected, they targeted Richard Kuklinski. The police secretly tracked the suspect. They even had a talented police officer impersonate a killer to befriend Kuklinski for a long time to collect evidence. In December 1986, Kuklinski was officially arrested to serve the investigation on charges of killing 5 people. The man who brought the notorious Mafia to the police was Phil Salamine, a local Mafia member and Kuklinski's best friend. Salamine tricked Kuklinski into telling him about a murder plot and recorded the conversation. The investigation, dubbed Operation Iceman, that began in 1985 and ended a year later. The Kuklinskis were on their way to breakfast when they were surrounded by police cars. While Barbara was still confused about what had happened, Pat Kane, the lead investigator, said bluntly, "He's a killer." At the investigation agency, the cold-blooded killer finally had to admit his actions. He said that because he failed to use poison to kill Gary Smith, he strangled Smith to death and hid the body under the hotel bed. This was the mistake that led the police to discover the murderer. Regarding the Louis Mosquet case, as mentioned above, Kuklinski did not wait for the body to thaw after more than 2 years of freezing but dumped it in the park, so the doctor was able to determine the time of the crime. In 1988, a New Jersey court sentenced Richard Kuklinski to 110 years in prison for his involvement in 5 murders. In 2003, he admitted to another murder in 1980, increasing his sentence to 30 years. He showed no signs of shame or guilt, and was even very proud. Pat Kane believed he had killed up to 300 people, killing whoever and whenever he wanted. After his arrest, Kuklinski's appetite for being in the public eye grew as strong as his appetite for killing. The Mafia boss gave interviews to prosecutors, psychiatrists, reporters, criminologists, and journalists. Kuklinski became the subject of 2 documentaries and spoke frankly about the crimes he committed. He claimed to have killed Jimmy Hoffa, the president of the most prominent international truckers union in the United States from 1957 to 1971, and was paid $40,000. In a television interview conducted from prison, Kuklinski claimed to have never felt remorse for anything he had done. However, he wanted his family to forgive him for hurting them. "Do you like yourself as an assassin?" the interviewer asked Richard. "Assassin? That sounds a bit odd," Richard replied with an amused smile. Then his face turned serious. "I'm just a killer." After 25 years in prison, Kuklinski's health began to deteriorate. In 2005, he was diagnosed with an incurable blood infection. Richard Kuklinski was eventually transferred to the hospital where Barbara had last seen her husband. In a moment of lucidity, he asked doctors to shock him to save his life if his heart stopped. However, when she left the room, Barbara signed a "Do Not Resuscitate" form. A week before Kuklinski died, they called his wife to ask her opinion on the form, but Barbara did not change her mind. Richard Kuklinski died on March 5, 2006 at the age of 70. His death was considered suspicious because Kuklinski was about to testify against Sammy Gravano, who hired Kuklinski to kill a police officer in the 1980s. Charges against Gravano were dropped after Kuklinski's death due to insufficient evidence.
Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed the content. And as always, feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments below. See you in the next one.